came across this plyak plan. It's a one-man boat. Possibly you could put a child in as a crew member. Took the detailed diagram, redrew it, and made a full set of plans. I'm using Logitrace 2018 to trace out and digitize this full set of plans. I've selected tracing polylines. The files I create here, the DXF files, will be used to cut out the parts on a CNC machine. Because it's straight lines, it's easy to trace out. There is 4 panels here, 4 1/4-inch panels, which I'll trace out separately and save one as a separate file. Then I'll use Vectric Aspire 9.5 to nest these panels for the best cut. As each panel is drawn, I let the computer fill it in and close the vector. And that's accomplished by selecting Done after you trace out each panel. On completion of each part that you trace, when you select Done, the computer will echo back and ask you if you want to join up the lines. Now we're going to start to trace out the internal frames. Again, I'm using tracing polylines. You'll notice when I'm tracing out these frames where the stringers connect to the frame, there's a small little circular cut, and that's called a fillet. And that's just to give it a bit of relief for the glue and sometimes for the wood to swell a bit. Here I also used the text command so I could label each frame. Sort of a neat feature. If you look carefully here at the diagram, right where the stringers connect up, you'll see those fillets. It's not a 90-degree cut, it's actually a cut with a little bit of a circle in it, and that's to give it a bit of relief. I found from experience when you cut stringers and fit them into those joints, sometimes it's a bit too tight, you have to sand it off. This way here, there is some relief. There are 8 internal frames required for the boat, but we only have to draw 4 of them because they're the same on either end, the bow and the stern. So when I finish the file, the final file, I will have all 8 frames so the computer can do the nesting for me for the best CNC cut. This diagram's a bit bigger, so you can actually see those fillets right on those slots there where the stringers connect in. It almost looks like about a 1/4-inch circle. You can see here I didn't like the way that draw was in the center, so I just deleted it and redrew it. So it's just a matter of going into Edit, toggle that spot, delete it, and redraw that portion again. Here you can see the number 4 frame. That's called the mold frame, and there's 2 of them, of course. Same with the number 3, there's 2 of them. But the mold frame just keeps the shape until the both sides and bottom are in place, and then you remove the number 4 frames, 2 of them, and make sure that those 4 knees are glued in. And that's what keeps the boat, that's what keeps the shape. One thing to remember is not to put any glue on that number 4 frame because you won't get it out. And also remove the screws, because I had the stringers screwed to the number 4 frame, and then when I put the bottom and the sides on, I removed all the screws. It just tapped out with a rubber hammer. I kind of like this text label feature. It allows you to label each frame. We're getting close to finishing up the drawing of all the frames. I'm going to create a final file, and then I'm going to load this DXF file into Vectric Aspire 9.5, check the vector quality, create a toolpath, and do the nesting. Shown here, I've put the 4x8 by 3/4 inch plywood on the CNC deck. The first cut shown here is the lap joint on the keelson. Because the keelson is over 12 feet long, we have to do it in 2 parts and lap joint it and bolt it together. I'm using a carbide 1/4 inch end mill running about 19,000 RPM at about 100 inches per minute feed. All the parts are tabbed because I don't want any of those parts to start flying out. Because it's 3/4 plywood, I ended up using about a 3/8 tab. To show the cuts, I didn't use the dust collector attached to the router. I just used a vacuum hose to pull out the chips. Took about 2 hours to do the whole cut. You can also see on some of those frames I used a finishing nail just to kind of tack it down to make sure that that frame doesn't move. I find with a large sheet like this, some of the center portions where I cut, it could lift up a bit. So I just use an 1.5 inch finishing nail, and I leave the head kind of showing so I can grab it easily and pull it out after I'm done. I take all these precautions because I don't want to ruin my cut. The nesting really pays off because that 4x8 sheet doesn't come off until all the parts are cut. Once the sheet is freed up, I'll take a saw and cut all those tabs. Now I'm going to load the quarter panels into Vectric Aspire 9.5, check the quality of the vectors, and do the nesting and the toolpath. We're ready for a CNC cut of the 1/4 inch plywood. I also use the same settings. I use a 1/4 inch carbide end mill running around 19,000 RPM, 80 inches per minute. I slow it down a bit on 1/4 inch plywood because sometimes the 1/4 inch plywood vibrates a bit and starts to climb up on the cutter. Once all the parts are removed from the sheet, we'll start assembly. I'll start assembling the frames to the keelson. You can also see there I'm attaching the stringers. I'm screwing them to the frames. There are 4 stringers to be applied. Once the sides and the bottom are applied, you make sure the screws are removed from the number 4 frames. Sides here and the bottom are done. If you look closely here, you can see the knees on the number 3 frame. It's a good-looking boat. It's got clean lines. It's just under 12 feet, and it's about 49 pounds.